Are we gonna do anything with the GoPro footage from the plantation that we visited in Natchitoches?
I don't really want to run it
Why not?
because I really didn't want to go that day, and I'm not a huge fan of the whole idea, and I don't know. I just don't want to be a part of it in any way, shape, or form. I think it's going in the vault, and I don't think I'm going to run it.
Okay, so this is something that I just don't understand. This is where you and I differ on this. Okay.
We'll set the backdrop.
Okay, so I made you go and visit a plantation in Natchitoches. When we were in Savannah, I made you visit a plantation there and you didn't want to go.
Did not.
So why? I don't understand it. Like, explain to me why you don't like to go visit plantations.
I mean, for number one, the stigma. And
Well, I mean,
it's it's not like I'm so woke or whatever. It's just, I feel in many ways like I have many black friends. I'm not just one of those white guys that has a black friend and uses and trots out that token black friend. Like, I have a lot of black friends, and I just feel like in some small way, it's a betrayal to just show up at those places. So
Do you think black people don't go?
I do think black people generally do not go. I imagine there are probably some black folks. We saw a black man working there, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's his job and everything, and I get that, and he's from that area. But as a tourist attraction, it feels slimy to me. I don't know.
Well, no, they're not tourist attractions. I mean, I guess, but like, I don't know. For me, I look at it like a moment in time that actually happened that people have glossed over in history books. And it is a part of our history that we have to acknowledge. And by visiting, I feel like we're acknowledging, I don't know, like, I think about all the Jews that go and visit concentration camps in Europe,
Auschwitz, yeah.
but there's more than one. That's the most famous one. But I've yet to hear a Jew say, I would never go. It's a part of history, and they acknowledge it and they go there and see it. Do you feel like you're racist if you go to the plantation?
I feel like the difference between those memorials and monuments in Europe and even in Israel, the Wailing Wall, I believe, is all for that reason, to commemorate what happened during the Holocaust. I feel like the big difference in those countries is they've publicly acknowledged and have set those places up as actual memorials and instruments of teaching rather than aggrandizing or glorifying plantation life, like here in the United States. Like, there's not a
No,
there's
continue.
there's not a national monument at a plantation recognizing, like, this is where horrors were enacted upon an entire race of people. So
We've actually talked about that, and I have wondered why there hasn't been, and being white, I don't know this. So somebody who is of color could maybe explain it to us. I've always wondered why the NAACP or a group have not done what has happened with the concentration camps in Europe.
well,
If there was,
can I jump in?
well, if there was, would you feel better about visiting it?
I don't think it's incumbent upon the NAACP to create this monument. I think it's incumbent upon the United States government to say we are sorry, and it's their responsibility to make such a monument. Now, to answer your question, I don't think it has happened because they can't get it done. And I don't know, I'm just guessing. I'm sure there have been attempts, but it is really funny that you go to all these towns in the South, and there are all these sort of daughters of the Confederacy, Confederate soldier monuments everywhere. And there are in certain cities. We were in Opelika, Alabama. There was definitely an acknowledgement there, I thought a great one, by one of their historical societies or their council people or whatever. If you go to the parks there, it tells you, like, this was a site where atrocities occurred and there were lynchings in this area, and they tell you how many and the years and the span and all that other stuff. And that's all great on an individual. I just think something rising to the level of Auschwitz, which is the example we're using, Auschwitz was an atonement by the German government after World War II. Like they greenlit that. They said we can never allow this to happen again. Whereas I don't think there has been that sort of groundswell of acknowledgement in the United States. And I would say a lot of the reason for that, I think, is a lot of people fear that if they have to acknowledge publicly, like this can never happen again, it does walk you down the path toward reparations. And I don't think a lot of Americans are ready to have that conversation.
Oh, that's all. This is so heavy. I just wanted to visit a moment in time.
Okay, but here's my thing with the plantation, bringing it back to like our exact visit.
I don't want to.
Had we not bumped into that forest ranger or the national parks ranger that we bumped into, we went on an off day, and I know on weekends they have actual tours and everything. Our conversation with her was very informational. Like you and I did not know much about sharecropping, and we did not know that it was until the 1960s that was still going on, which is basically indentured servitude, which is a fancy name for you're still a slave.
Yep.
That part was great, but had we not bumped into her, we would have walked around there and we would have just said, I would never have said this. I'm just putting words in someone else's mouth, but we could have just said, wow, what a pretty plantation, or this is so beautiful, or wow, look at how they used to live, the cottages or whatever. And we would have never, ever fully wrapped our heads around the slavery component of it.
I disagree. I never would have said, wow, this is a pretty plantation. I would have said, wow, they had a lot of slaves working here. And this was a running business from morning till night, and these poor people. That's what I would have said. I guess, I don't know. I guess you look at it so differently than I do. I feel like it's a learning lesson for sure. And even without that tour guide, reading the information on the plaques, I mean, I read that the nanny lived underneath the house. That she explained it, but I read it there. So for me to go to the plantation and to see where the slaves lived, how much of the acreage they had to work during the day, where the outhouses were, where the kitchens were, how they had no light. I mean, that's something I never, ever got out of a history book all through the years. I mean, sure, I read it, but standing there was different. So for me, I didn't feel bad visiting. And I don't know if that makes me a Karen. I mean, I just felt like I should be there to experience a moment that happened in time. Obviously, not experiencing it, but seeing it from my own two eyes. I mean, we went to Savannah and we saw where the slave quarters were in the Victorian homes, and they were terrible. They were in the cellar. We never read that in a book. We read that they're...
Well, that's what carriage houses were, basically. They were slave quarters.
I know, but to see it with your own two
carriage
eyes...
houses were a whitewashing of
course.
This is where we keep our slaves.
Of course. But to see it with your own two eyes is completely different. And I don't think that makes me a racist because I wanted to go to a plantation. I don't think that poo-poos my friendships with black friends or makes my black friends. I hope it doesn't make them look any differently at me because... I don't know. Does it make me a Karen? Because I wanted to see a moment in time.
If you want to go and you want to be educated, that's fine.
But you're saying there's no...
I think traditionally people have held weddings at plantations. They've had all sorts of family events because it's a beautiful landscape. It's a beautiful plantation. I just don't agree with that sentiment. You know, we're talking about the plantation we went to is actually a national park.
Well,
and there is actually an educational component to it. But there are plenty of plantations there that are bed and breakfasts now.
That could be.
Big difference.
Okay, that is for sure. I'm not talking about that. But that is very common. You're right. That is very common. And so does that take away from the sting of everything that happened in history when you turn a plantation into a bed and breakfast?
I think it is trying to pivot and create something out of a place that probably should have been bulldozed. Yeah. I mean, I just feel that way. I know it's our history. I know it's happened. Like I said, I'm not particularly woke. Like I don't care about a lot of things that a lot of people in the public sphere, in the political sphere care about on the left side.
What do you mean you're not politically woke? I don't know what that means.
Woke generally means like a lot of people. Oh, okay, so the coinage of that term basically means I'm sensitive to the issues of the African American or the gay or the female community. Like it's basically a catch-all phrase now that the right uses to say
you're
conscious of different. But I'm not like to the degree that somebody who lobs out the word woke. Like, I'm not out on a street corner.
Yeah. Saying, I'm woke, look at me.
Right.
Yeah.
So
You're very conscious, though, of social issues. Very.
I am. And so here's my point. I find if you want to talk about a plantation as a business, in my view, if your business is based on forced labor, you're not really a business. And the fact that the United States let this go on as long as it did, and then let everybody in the South, basically in the slave states, pivot to sharecropping and other forms of indentured servitude.
Which is still slavery.
Right. You shouldn't have to force people to work for your enterprise if you're truly a good business person. It's easy to say, I bought a bunch of people and I forced them to work in my fields, and that's how I became the rich, wealthy man and generational wealth for 10 generations of my family or whatever. To me, I don't know. It's like that's a sinful enterprise. And I also know for a fact that if you overlay the current right to work states in the United States, if you overlay that map with the slavery map, it lines up almost identically. So as much as I love the South, I love the people in the South, I love all the towns we visited, the food is amazing, all that other stuff. Let's to visit a plantation for me is just that undercurrent of a system that liked free labor to line their own pockets.
Okay. I looked at it more as like a history tour. There's a lot still to be learned, but for you, you're never going back.
I'm never going to another one, no.
Okay.
Been
all
to
right.
2.
And
that's 2 more than I ever thought I would visit.
And definitely no bed and breakfast.
Definitely no bed and breakfast.
Look, there is a difference between visiting a national park, which is what we did on both occasions, and going to a wedding at a plantation.
Frankly, I'm done with the whole Plantation National Park thing as well. Nothing got solved.
Empty nest, full tank.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.